Hello everyone and welcome. In this recording, I would like to speak about Neptune's ingress into the sign of Aries. I know I'm a few days off, but I know that you'll forgive me. And this is quite a big deal for a number of different reasons. Well, one of them is that Neptune is one of the big power players, of course, in a very Neptunian-like fashion, subtle way. However, it is a collective planet. It rules mainly the collective unconscious. The way Neptune affects us, both as individuals and as collective, and our reality and everything in it, astrology, uh, it is through the unconscious. And everything that basically lies there, comes from there, transcends from there, goes back into that. So that's why this is, even though in a certain way rather subtle, especially now, because it just ingressed, it needs a few weeks, or better said, it needs to permanently enter Aries, and I'll explain this a little bit later on, in order to make its effects well known. Now, I know that very many astrologers go back to 1861, last time Neptune was in the sign of Aries. For me personally, that's not valid and not really a wise way to interpret. Why? Because since then, not only was Neptune in the way of the very edge of the solar system dethroned by Pluto, but also Pluto's cousins and brothers and sisters, the vastity of trans-Neptunian objects come into play. And those change everything, because it is absolutely true that Neptune is the final frontier, in the sense that it is a big planet. It is a real planet in the astronomical way, the orbit, the size, etc., etc. However, Neptune, by its very nature, is secret, the mystery. Is it real? Is it the ethereal is ruled by Neptune and its home sign of Pisces. So you can imagine that we, since that moment, have entered into a very trans-Neptunian realm where the mystery, the enigma, the also the quantum nature of reality thickens. It becomes much more part of not just our collective reality, but also our daily lives in so very many ways. You listening to this horoscope is a prime example of that. Horoscopes and astrology, or any other ways, divination, spirituality, ancient or not so ancient, modern, anything, wisdom of the spiritual or psychological kind, well, that's Neptune. You might say that psychology is more Pluto. In its depths and psychoanalysis, the understanding and digging in it is definitely Pluto, but just the psyche itself is still in the Neptunian realm. So this is why, even though we collectively have experienced Neptune in the sign of Aries before, but never in this way, so I'm not gonna refer to the past. Even though Neptune is one of those astrological powers that many times has a lot to do with the past. But in its final degrees of Pisces, where it will return um, around 23rd of October this year, well, that is really the past, and we see that it is really pouring out. Most of the armed conflicts that are really horrifying everyone are rooted in, well, actually the collective unconscious. Okay, you may say what's this border, that border, etc., etc., but that's really the past, and it is the collective memory, the collective feelings in the unconscious, in the collective unconscious, that were not resolved. So, just like a person, if those feelings are not resolved, there comes a moment when they will shoot up to the surface, much like a geyser. And Aries, well, in the sign of Aries, just understand this in a humoristic humor, not as in laughter, but rather in a Ptolemaic humor, or the configuration of the energies, the alchemical nature of the energies. Well, it's like a geyser, really, isn't it? Because Neptune, in a certain way, is going to be kind of boiled up by Aries. But there is much more to uh, the boiling than this. Well, on first hand, right now, Neptune is at 0 degrees of Aries, which is a very, very, perhaps one of the most powerful and potent degrees in all of the zodiac. In mundane astrology, is the world stage. So whatever happens on the world stage. But going a bit deeper, it is the first breath of creation. So Neptune, at this degree, takes us back in any way, shape, and collectively, individually, through our states, through our, well, even research, because Neptune is no longer in the invisible, purely ethereal, purely psi realm of Pisces, but in a very realistic, earthly, in this physical reality, beginning realm of Aries. So that is very susceptible to direction, research, what I wish to, for example, uncover, learn. Aries is the GPS, Aries is the head. So this in itself is definitely going to add a new layer to anything regarding the creation. I need to say myth, but understand that it's not going to be a myth because it's going to be also purely scientific. As in, sorry, no. It's going to be also scientific, not just purely spiritual, or not just purely philosophy, not just purely our own subtle or transcendent perception of it. So, how everything began, whatever that means, is really gonna be looked on, focused on, but through a Neptunian lens, through the lens of the unconscious as well. But of course, Neptune, fantasy, Neptune, the spirit, Neptune, creativity, poetry, music, art in so very many shape and form. But Neptune, we must remember, is the art while it's still within us. However, Aries is it gets out. So without needing too much oracle skills, we know that this is gonna affect the artistic world. New things, new what actually whatever that means, new anything in the artistic world is gonna start showing it. Not yet born, because for that Neptune needs to permanently ingress into the sign of Aries. And this means new artists, new currents, new philosophies, new self-expression, rebellion, fight, assertion, but of course, perhaps not in the classical way, but in an artistic, philosophical, Neptunian way in that part of the human collective or industry, or call it however you want. And 0 degrees of Aries, even in that sense, is the world stage. It's going to be seen, known out there. Well, Neptune, especially at this degree, well, it will tend to dish out secrets. It will tend to make certain things no longer be mystery, no longer be, how should I say, enigma, no longer be conspiracy. What do I mean by this? Either it's disillusion forever, it's BS, no truth in it, it was just a figment of our imagination, or psychological, um, Yeah, manipulation, why not? Because that's also Neptune. Uh, the charts of charmers, comedians, but those who have very strong effect, or anyone who influences either a person or a collective, has very strong Neptune placement in their chart. So, yes, it's gonna dish out what's real and what's not. Not in a general sense, but in a sense of the past. And with this, I need to refer back to 1861, whatever time period is that. From since then, whatever happened, which part of it is delusion, lies, deception, fantasy, illness, because no one says the collective unconscious cannot be ill. There is such thing as mass psychosis. Just look back at 2020, the pandemic and many other what 2020? Look at today. Certain nuances of conflict and political battles are pure psychosis. And speaking about politics, and problem is I cannot not speak about politics because Aries the world stage, action time. And Neptune is gonna be very soon, more specifically, 25th of May, joined by Saturn, and Saturn make things real, especially at this degree. Note that Saturn doesn't like it all that much in the sign of Aries, so it can have extreme qualities. For example, extreme assertion, where its most cruel possible expression. Or the opposite of this, no rules, no boundaries, freedom. Aries the ram. Very few things can stop either an enraged ram or a lustful ram, or you know what I mean. And also Saturn in the sign of Aries itself. Last time it happened, if I may be mistaken with this because I don't really have the exact date right now, but it was around 89, something like that. The late 80s. Well, you can imagine how very profoundly the late 80s changed the political and anything economical face of Europe, especially, but not just. I live in Europe, so that's why. But so both Neptune and both Neptune and Saturn in the sign of Aries speak about big changes. Well, Neptune floods. Aries boils it up, so it's not just your typical flood. Saturn, well, it will do something. It is even if it's not very comfortable in the sign of Aries, it's still reality, it's still authority, assertion. Especially in the sign of Aries, individuality, sovereignty, anything, self-righteousness, you know. So I don't need to make any predictions, just put what I said into context. Imagine the implications of that, and May is fast approaching, so it's already on the boil. And in many places in the world, certain people were convicted in courts of justice. That in itself points back to I do believe, autumn, or both summer and autumn period when Saturn and Jupiter squared. So they held a square formation. They squared 2 times since. And what does that mean? Well, it is exactly that. The law, what is fair, and is Saturn executory. Neptune is deception. Neptune is you make the law what you want it to suit your needs. Or anything in election process is manipulation. Let's be honest. even the most righteous and correct and fair, and it's still influence, convincing. That's Neptune, that's Pisces. So people were, in a sense, disqualified from being able to be elected. And this is where Aries and Neptune and very soon Saturn comes into play. Exactly those people who promoted individualism, self-righteousness, to uphold cultural, political, historical, any kind of distinctiveness of a place. So that will have big repercussions. Because exactly those archetypes, and this is where, just look at the world stage, it's literally playing out, were, well, disqualified, ejected. Neptune, in a theoretic degree of Pisces, is that ejection, elimination. So this is where I don't think I need to explain further. But to add to this, even though Neptune is in the sign of Aries, it's still conjunct the North Node in the sign of Pisces. Outer sign conjunction. North Node being at 27 degrees of Pisces. Right now conjunct Venus and also conjunct Saturn. So what is happening even now, today, this week, this month, is very, very symbolic. Because when a big planet, any big planet does such a move like Neptune, as I said, Saturn follows. Uranus does the same, but in the sign of between Gemini and Taurus. Pluto did the same until last year between Capricorn and Aquarius. So we are very, very familiar with this type of expression. It just gives a good hint, a foresight, a foreshadow. It sets the stage up, and then when it ingresses for good, that's when things play out in a very serious manner. And this is exactly what we can expect, Venus economic issues. But this is conjunct the North Node. So it really matters what the collective unconscious Pisces, but because it's the North Node, it's not the typical unknowingness. It is not the typical, how should I say this? It's in the shadow forever, or it's under the water, the ocean forever. No, it's out. And we are influencing this because North Node is exactly that. Programming water bending in the sign of Pisces. But water bending not in a Cancerian way, emotions and feelings and states, but rather in a Piscean way, powerfully affecting our sense of the past. Like trauma healing. You go back and you attribute a totally different feeling to an event that happened in the past and how you reacted to it emotionally back then. That's trauma healing. We're doing the same thing. Again, Venus retrograde right now conjunct the node, economics, what love, compassion, solidarity. It is an idealistic Venus. What ideals, as in, how are we embodying the Venusian principle in all shapes and forms? And then there's Saturn. We better mean it, we better make it real, or rather, it's real. Whatever we choose to embody is going to be real. And again, the North Node, this very deep water bending, where we bend the waters of the unconscious, collectively and individually alike. So whatever happens now is foreshadowing something. But of course, sorry, I omitted Mercury, who is also retrograde and conjunct the North Node in Pisces. Conjunct Venus, even. And Mercury right now is by the degree conjunct the North Node, so mind. Mind, understanding, perception, wanting to know. Again, Mercury retrograde conjunct the North Node, like profound psychoanalysis. Not the, how should I say, the controlled, knowledge-based, professional Plutonian expression, but when the divine dishes it out. Either through intuition, through instinct, through dreams, through everyone's own connection with the divine. Because the divine itself is different and has a different relationship, not just to every human being, every insect, every microbe, every virus, even, you know what every molecule. So absolutely, this is gonna be pretty big, but it foreshadows. Personally speaking, well, it is really the same thing because our own unconscious is a drop in the ocean of the collective unconscious. I'm not saying that it matters less, it matters more than the collective. But we are invited, like it or not, North Node in the sign of Pisces, to, well, 0 degrees of Aries, have an effect, have a say in it, but in a Neptunian way. Dream it, desire it, wish it. When I say desire, it's definitely not the Martian desire or Leo desire or desire in a fiery expression. Yet, Aries is fire desire, but the primal impulse. However, Neptune is the divine desire, that spark which creates the dream, the fantasy, you get what I mean. And Mercury, Venus, Saturn, all of them are helping and supporting this very strongly. So we are gonna be feeling this individually. Let me give you certain examples of how we may experience all of this. Well, Neptune, let's say that in our example, it is a very strong artistic energy. Some people have such a powerful and vivid and creative imagination, but they cannot sing, they cannot draw, they can't really express themselves artistically in a physical or externalize it, better said. Other people are so skilled, but they have no touch of imagination. Other people still have both, lack courage. Or when I say courage, don't understand it necessarily, typically in a bravery way, but something makes them totally incompatible to show 0 degrees of Aries, the world, other people, their families, themselves even, look at what I can do. Other people, let's say, were artists, had it all, but got burned out. Other people, especially this with the outer sign conjunction, both with Venus, Saturn, North Node, and Mercury, had something in the past which stopped their artistic expression or inner artistic creativity, the fuel, the dreams. For example, substances. For example, drink. And when I don't mean water. That's very much Neptune. That's very much Pisces. That's actually very much Mercury in the sign of Pisces if it's badly aspected, because it just dissolves the rationale that's needed to actually structure it sufficiently. Otherwise, the dissolution of the rationale is very positive, very favorable in this sense. Let me tell you an example. Saints, well, their Mercuries was very much dissolved. They lived what we would call an insanity, just that insanity convinced nature. And for nature, it wasn't insanity. You get what I mean? They like extended their own inner cosmos and universe onto ours, and theirs was stronger. And that is so Neptune. Why? Who do you want to convince with your art? Or this can be a true vice versa, but only in Pisces. In Aries, who do you want to convince with your art is more? Well, ultimately, nature, cosmos, the divine, human collective, human unconscious even. Because you really, really want to convince the unconscious more than the conscious, like Mercury or Venus. I know Venus gives the money, but the unconscious compels. If you only convince Mercury, you haven't done all that much. If you only convince Venus, she's not unconditional. She will, negotiate. Or she will, Venus. Would you convince the unconscious? That's where I want it. That's where I'm immersed. Like, I wanted to say Mona Lisa as a very how should I say, impressive painting that immerses you, the mimic, the depth of the expression. But let's use something more Neptunian, like the scream. It's a bit surreal, however, it's so real because that's how we feel. And it's more real than surreal because that's exactly how we feel inside. We don't feel inside like a person screaming normally. We feel inside like the scream. Or anything that you want to bring to the table, Vivaldi, the Four Seasons, of any branch of art, even Saturnian, the architecture, the grand architecture, the impressive architecture. Saturn in the sign of Pisces, ancient architecture, pyramids, Easter Isle idols, basically anything. I don't even need to dig my own memory for big relevant examples because everyone knows what their favorite big, deep, all immersive architecture is. It says Saturn. Now I know that as Saturn is approaching 29 degrees of Pisces, that means flood. That means water will wash away grand architecture. This may represent that one of the seven wonders or many wonders of the ancient world is bye-bye forever. But that in itself is not catastrophe. Or it will be catastrophe, but it's not catastrophe because how does something new take its place? Karmic endings. What's that word? Cord cutting of relationships are not just individual. They're collective, global, nations, people, land and people, etc. So as Saturn nears that, and I must repeat, Saturn, just like Neptune, will retrograde back, but it's not about Saturn. This is about Neptune, but something big, structures, ancient structures are gonna be washed away. Simultaneously to this, something that is structure, ancient, at the bottom of the ocean is gonna be revealed. Because Pisces, 29 degree of Pisces. And also, Aries is also the host right now to Neptune's wife, Salasha. Pisces in itself is also host to a trans-Neptunian object called Gongkun, and it's spelled Gongong. A vengeful Chinese water flood god. So everything spells here. Let me put this even. Let me make this worse. Pisces is also host to Nessus, a very vengeful centaur. So it is gonna be quite a show of destruction, and I don't mean this in a fearful way. Rather, the past has to go. Quantum age, right? We begin anew, upgrade, transcendence, humanity shifts. Well, this needs to reflect. This needs to reflect Saturn in a concrete way. So this is how it all begins. But Neptune has a long stay in Aries, so I don't need to mention the years. Not mistaken, until 2060. No, that's a bit exaggerated. It has a long stay in Saturn until 2027, if I'm, or 2028, if I'm not mistaken. So those years are going to be very active in this sense. But before reconstruction can take place, as I said, demolition. However, this is not the Pluto an erratic degree of Capricorn type of demolition, but rather where it's the flood. And I more mean it symbolically. What is the flood? Emotion, or the collective unconscious. Uranus itself, as I said, is starting to ingress into the sign of Gemini. That has revolution spelled on it in so very many ways. So it's revolution time. Look at the events right now taking place in France and in many other European countries where I had enough of this. And I'm not politicizing, I'm just your reporter telling you that this is what people feel. The collective unconscious, something bubbles up. The geyser is beginning to boil. And this is perfectly true individually. How did we get from artists to this? Well, in the sense that in the sign of Aries, especially when both Saturn and Neptune ingress for good, the situation changes. Let's say though the person who has absolutely no imagination and fantasy, but is a masterful genetically inherited drawer or singer or whatever, what prevents them from teaming up with the person whose imagination is boundless but has no physical bodily skill? You can imagine that the union of this is gonna be amazing. It's gonna be the key to individual self-expression for both. Uranus and Gemini immediately will twins. You find one another in whatever means, but we must not forget that Aries, especially 0 degrees in Aries, chances are it means not for money, not for industry, not to please the slave drive. I'm so sorry to use this word, Capricorn. I was a bit biased here. Let me use a top-down authority or the current structure which allows artistic expression to be gratified, or you know what I mean. That kind of starts to end. Neptune dissolves it, but in a fiery way because it's boiled up by Aries. Right now, ironically speaking, Saturn trines Mars in the sign of Mars being in the sign of Cancer, Saturn in Pisces. That's an unusual water trine because Mars doesn't like it in Cancer. However, especially in this position going back on its shadow path, it's so defensive. Unbreakable, where the Cancer's shell is unbreakable. And this energy this exists in nature. The mantis shrimp. The mantis shrimp has two big qualities to it that are actual real superpowers. One hand, it's vision. The mantis shrimp is one of those beings who has such a wide range of color perception that to us it is unimaginable. It basically exists in many dimensions at the same time due to its ability to perceive myriad of colors, totally unperceivable, inexistent to us. It's a multi-dimensional being. It's just a shrimp. And its punch, if you want Google what this means, is so powerful that it boils water around it. It's fast. If that means quickness. That means hyper. But it also the punch. Well, I don't want to necessarily translate this collectively, but individually I want to translate it the breakthrough. Or preparing the breakthrough, because this is psychological energy. Let me give you an example. The person who is an artist, has imagination, has skills, something prevented them, their history, their something. They get an inheritance. Mars and Cancer family, right? Saturn and Pisces. Doesn't mean that someone has to pass away. They just get an inheritance. From one day to the next, they find themselves being able to, if they so wish, tomorrow to have an exposition. You can imagine the fulfillment. You can imagine the impact. You can imagine the friends, the real friends, real soul connection friends that spirit draws into will change their lives. So this breakthrough can come for all of us. Now, even right now, because Mars will leave this position. But that breakthrough, may it be just something purely psycho-emotional, mystical, magical, alchemical by any means, or compassion, solidarity, family, or friends, or whatever you call family, or community, or where you live helps you out big time. That changes what you are going to be doing under Neptune and Saturn in the sign of Aries. But right now, Neptune is the most powerful expression because Saturn is not there yet. So it's a preparation. This foreshadows a lot of things. Your dreams. Dreams are, well, in the sign of Pisces, of course, Neptune in the sign of Pisces, of course, dreams. And of course, it's where you know that the dream world is a different dimension. Many times it's more real. But still in Pisces, it's so blurry. It's so you need to interpret. You need to meditate, dwell on it, to recurring. Call up a friend like me. What does this mean? And this last year and this year, I think I was more of a dream interpreter than an astrologer or mystic or anything. And I love that. I so love dream interpretation. So please, I'm open to that. Especially that it's short, but so sweet. Okay, Aries is a bit different, where it's like the dream doesn't need interpretation. It's a premonition. Or even if it needs interpretation, it's dead obvious. It's strikingly obvious. So expect a lot of real-time preparation like this. For example, I dream of the exact place. I dream of the exact number. I don't want to hint to a lottery because that's silly, isn't it? But I am 1,000,000,000% convinced that for some people it's gonna be literally dreaming the lottery numbers or whatever numbers or whatever you need to do to break through. You dream it. It's so vivid that you can't ignore it. You go do it. There it is, the breakthrough. Of course, there is a lot of time because this Neptune, as I said, it stands still to go retrograde in Aries on the 3rd of July, goes back into Pisces 23rd of October, and returns back to the sign of Aries on the 27th of January 2026. So that's a good time window. And to add to we're actually speaking much more about the present moment than anything else, because 16th of April this month, Mercury goes back to 0 degrees of Aries, conjuncting Neptune. 1st of May, Beltane. Sorry, I just realized this as I was speaking. Beltane. Wow. Venus. Well, Venus can. There's no other planet which is more Beltane than Venus. Aries, first breath, but also the primal sexual attraction. So I do believe that this in this particular 2025 Beltane, a lot of babies are gonna be, well, invited into the world. But I don't know if I should say this or not, but anyway, my channel, right? All the souls, all the victims of the horrors of the past years and present wars, they need to be reborn, right? They passed in total injustice, regardless from which perspective or however you wanna look at it. If someone is ended by a machine or electricity, that's where it doesn't respect the principles of Mars. It doesn't respect Baal, right? Another name for Mars. Well, if you don't respect the lowest of the low, well, you can imagine that it's big trouble. It's where spiritually you did something not very nice, and it's not karma who what all of us should be fearing, but rather 29 degrees of Pisces. Elimination, in the sense that live this out in your own dimension. That means locked in yourself. That's one thing, but those souls need to be reborn, need loving families, loving individuals, loving parents, or replace parent with tutor, caretaker, old brother, sister, the kind old man, not the pedophile, but the real kind old man in society that just sacrifices for any child, any youth. So it doesn't matter who you are, if biologically you can or cannot have, or want to or not, everyone can be a parent in their own unique, specific Saturn in Aries, right? To these souls that need to be reborn. If there is one way we can put this right, that's the way we can allow babies to be born. Parent children. And this is where, since I myself started this topic, let me complicate things a little bit further. And I'm so sorry to bore you at my horoscope, this philosophy and foresight, and this complicated prediction that other astrologers shy away from because it doesn't look good on Instagram. There is a trans-Neptunian object at 1 degrees of Aries that sometimes retrogrades back to 0. And it's called Borasisi Pabu. It's a system binary. What's specific to this is the father wound. Borasisi is known for paternal abandonment wound, or when the father rejects the child. In a classical, typical case, father having rejected the child means that the mother is also going with along with the child, and they have a fantastic new story and a life free from a cruel father. So thank you for rejecting me, kind of. But at the same time, we must really generalize this, that we cannot say just father, when parents reject children, or when mother rejects the child and the father. So in any combination, Neptune conjuncts this. What does this mean? Well, this means that right now, and especially in the coming weeks when Neptune makes its way to that 1 degrees of Aries, anyone who had this in their lives one way or another, and I repeat, it doesn't need to be your physical, biological parents. Replace that with teacher, especially in primary school, any teacher in any school, boss at work, especially your first boss or one of the first bosses, or any authoritarian figure, or any figure that was supposed to give you care and nurture. Any wounds, traumas due to that are going to be extremely triggered. Well, if we look at the world stage, this means mass walking out on whatever that means. I don't want to, let's not get there. Individually, it's time to remember the 16th of April, voice it. Mercury, speak it out. And Beltane, just because you had this wound, this Neptune dissolves it. It no longer means anything. It doesn't limit you from taking on a parental role. Usually, being rejected by father or parents, or in any context, makes the person shy away from having the same role as the one who rejected them. So becoming a father, mother, teacher, tutor, caretaker, taking on a responsibility, not because they can, actually quite the opposite. They're expert at this, but the psychological echo of the trauma prevents their Neptune, their imagination from even allowing them to dream this, imagine this. Quite the opposite. It's the anti-dream, like antimatter. It strips them from any chance of being able to. Neptune dissolves this. I think I said what I needed to say. Just that it might not be a very easy energy because Chiron is also in Aries. So Chiron is going to be aspected in this or that way by the personal planets all throughout the year, and many other things that are going to aspect Chiron. So this will trigger. This what I said, the rejection wound, Borasisi, Babu. Well, this is part of Chiron and Aries, the self wound. I do not exist. I cannot exist as a father. I cannot exist as a mother. Okay, maybe not biologically, but this is the geyser. Neptune is going to be boiled up. There are a myriad different ways where you can be a parent. One would say dog, cat, or any animal parent. However, in this particular case, it's not that. Why? Beltane, souls need to be reborn urgently. So it needs to be people, human babies. But Beltane, Venus at 0 degrees of Aries. Okay, on the world stage, I don't even want to get to this sensitive topic, but I need to mention it. Sexual minority or any like this rights and protests and but besides this, well, freedom, like Beltane, magic of love. Really, love has to become magical. Love cannot be a profile on the internet. Words that we type especially through instant messaging, is not compatible with the very nature of love. The person who you converse with, neither you or them are yourselves. You're just your minds. And please believe me if you wish, nothing else. And that's why those relationships in 99% of, how should I say, don't work out. I know that fate can work through that, but when fate works through that, it's not going to be more than 3 sentences and they meet. And that's fate. When it's hours and hours and days of blah blah blah, it's just your mind, it's just your wishful think. Both, but not your Aries. What do I say? Not your genes, not who you are in your body, not who you are in nature, not who nature birthed you to be. But okay, I finished with this. And there's something else that is a bit, let's say, concerning and has a lot to do exactly with this. Mercury, Venus, but Neptune, also Saturn when he gets here, 25th of May, are going to be squaring a trans-Neptunian object called chaos. I don't need to interpret what chaos, the name, actually this one, the name says what it is. And what does this mean? Well, for some people, it means that under the energies of Neptune in the sign of Pisces, somehow they made chaos be, let me use a metaphor, fall in love with them. That's a big deal. That's a very big deal because your life is going to change to a fantasy story, but it's going to be real life. Well, for other people, it's not as good because it means that there is no way of preventing your unconscious to spill out. Secrets, things you're hiding, especially, remember, Venus, love, marriage, sexuality, what you've done, North Node in the sign of Pisces, in any way, shape, and form, what you're not owning up to, it's gonna spill. But on the other hand, the most positive side of this, truly unusual attractions and partnerships are gonna occur. Uranus and Gemini already, how should I say, affects this in a very hazardous way where fate, hazard, coincidence, sometimes accidents, sometimes even the not nice, brings two souls together. And how should I express this in the best possible sense? Because love is so real love. I'm not speaking about interest. I need this, or my attraction is the following, or I dislike. No, it's chaos. It's chaos, right? It's gonna work, not just work, but be something like Gemini, right? True union. Let me give you an example of this. Frida Kahlo and her husband, I don't recall his name, but I know both of them were artists. They were two almost opposing universes. One was a tiny little, fragile, disabled, but infinitely beautiful little girl. The other one was a dinosaur, right? However, just look at that's the example I use. So it's gonna do a lot of things, but chaos in the sign of Cancer squaring the actually both 0 degrees of Aries, 0 degrees of Cancer, okay, 1 in this case, is the world stage, is public, it's very important degree. So either family is gonna be formed. in a chaotic way, chance, hazard, chaos. But on the other hand, this is where chaos, well, what does chaos want? To unite, perfect unity, to unite everything into one. No, not to be any separation, duality, or anything between anything in existence. That's a powerful force. Neptune in Aries, squaring that, well, you know, it can go both ways. In the sense that if something breaks the Cancerian shell, and understand it in borders, Cancer is always the borders between nations, cultural borders, some kind of, either it breaks it, it breaks the impossible, for example, the European Union, right? NATO, or, well, it does the opposite. It unites even if it's unimaginable, impossible, Neptune. Let me give you more positive examples. Forgiveness is where it would be impossible. So this has quite a strong implication, to be honest. Another energy that I would like to mention here is 0 degrees of Aquarius. That's a sextile. But with asteroid Urania, Urania is the goddess of astronomy, hence astrology indirectly too. Some people say direct astrology. You can imagine that this will have technology and all that. I don't even want to say because that's very obvious. The AI is gonna mimic that it's almost real. The AI will have manipulative psychological talents, or the opposite. It can be a better counselor, therapist, astrologer, mystic in a healing sense than us. And if you want to try meta AI with tarot readings, you're gonna be shocked. Like, it's better than me. I'm gonna confess to this. It's better. But anyway, that's powerful. That's really, really powerful, even in astrology, because now you're gonna be a bit surprised here. There are many semi-real planets in astrology, of which I'm gonna name 2 that are most relevant for me personally. Now, what does this mean? In my personal, so just my own personal view of this, well, they're ethereal. They are real in the sense that they have a slight alteration in the gravity of other objects, but they're not real, that you can't see them ever with any technology. One of them is, I think you expected this, Transpluto, Isis Transpluto, which lies way beyond even the orbit of Sedna, so outside the heliosphere. Some people might say that, well, this isn't so much hypothetical, this is real, Transpluto is real. Yes, some people think that either it is a rocky planet similar to the size of Earth, which is so far away and receives so little light that it simply cannot be detected even by Hubble or any telescope. Other people say that it's a failed star, which, well, it would be the size of Jupiter, but far enough outside the heliosphere. For example, the sun's binary twin at the creation of the solar system, in some, according to some theories. Well, there's that, or the final, there's many theories, but this is what I'm gonna speak about. It's a primordial black hole. These can be valid. Why not? In all cases, these would be undetectable right now in the present with any technology, and it would be there. So Aries Transpluto is at 3 degrees of the sign of Virgo. And in astrology, it is, well, how should I say this in a non-crazy fashion? Resurrection, rapture. Don't understand it in a biblical sense, but rather when something is renewed, but in a way that it transcends everything. Like, let me give you the classic example. The actual meaning of transcendence, you get the spiritual wisdom and calmness and high, and you become a light being by. Isis trans Pluto, that which lies even beyond the unconscious, beyond the realm of shadow, a direct gateway to a multiverse or omniverse or whatever. The other one is at the other end, if you know what I mean. It is hypothesized. Of course, in modern days, this was nullified. Most people don't, well, they think it was totally disproved. It's called Vulcan, and theoretically it is a very small planet uh, between Mercury and the Sun. And Vulcan, well, its symbolism is quite obvious. It is ingenious, like Hephaestus, the blacksmith of the gods. Ingeniousness, but which comes from the hypermind, the hyper intellect, or vision, prophecy, or an even more direct Mercury than Mercury. What does that mean? Where if Mercury and the Sun would be one, as if your identity would be your mind and your perception and everything. And that is hypothesized to be in the sign of Taurus around 27 degrees. So I do believe that due to Uranus sextile with this 0 degrees Neptune, we're going to be discovering something that perhaps we never ever realized could be real, but Urania is expert at hypothesis. And finally, I would like to just mention a few words for each sign, what this Neptune in the sign of Aries would mean for them personally. Again, remember, it is your unconscious's connection to the collective unconscious, so don't want to make it all that much egotic and personal because it's Neptune. So Aries, well, Aries is actually the host of it. So if anything, people who have their suns in the sign of Aries are going to be feeling this quite strongly. And the key word is so simple. You become the dream. This is where don't dream in the realm of dreams, become the dream, whatever that means to you. The negative expression, be very careful with drink and substances because it can also become you. For natives born under the sign of Taurus, well, it is the domain of the 12th house, right? So, in a nutshell, whatever we experienced Neptune in the sign of Pisces as collectively, just in a Taurian fashion where Taurus unconscious is very volcanic. Volcanous, right? It is very, sometimes, Taurus unconscious is one of the most violent possible. You would be surprised, but yes. So this can represent, in a sense, either, how should I say, embodying a faith, a principle in such a powerful manner where it definitely changes your life forever, but in a constructive sense. You accomplish something incredible, even to you. The negative sense to this is delusion. And Taurus's delusion is hedonism and comfort, where comfort becomes the spirit for you. The sign of Gemini, well, Neptune is where you're really gonna be tested because, sorry, meeting a myriad of people, different background, different culture, tumultuous connection. This is where if Gemini is already pretty split and everyone's friend by divine design, now that is going to be literal. Geminis are going to find themselves in the coming years extraordinarily busy. Very, 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 very busy. Ideal, well, actually, I wanted to say ideological work, but maybe that's not even excluded because someone needs to speak the ideals. Someone needs to, like a cheerleader, in an elevated way. So, other expressions of this, everyone needs a best friend. And something specific to the sign of Gemini is that they can make it impossibly real despite despite every reason why you shouldn't. So there's gonna be that. For natives born under the sign of Cancer, this is big career. Either a career sucking them in, like, falling into deep water and sinking in a career. This is long term. And this is almost like the alchemist journey, but in their career. Or them dreaming up something so unique that it becomes a career. Or life path, of course. Leo, well, this means that you really gonna, how should I say, break free from anything that used to be your own philosophical system most of your life. What does that innovate? But you become your own philosopher, basically. And Leo will have a rebellious nature, not taking anything external. Sorry, external thought, external suggestion, ancient wisdom, any wisdom, like hyper individualism, but in philosophy. But that also means higher education, knowledge, etc. Let me give an example. I'm a Leo. I go to a psychologist and I'm not impressed. Very not impressed. It doesn't matter why. And I realize, well, I'm a better psychologist to myself than that person. Bye. Virgo. Well, for Virgo natives, this is quite a potent energy in a sense that profound psychological healing. Virgo natives are very, very good at blocking out really bad memories and any lived experience that for other people echoes, reverberates. Virgos can very quickly push it down in the realm of the forgotten. Not anymore though. But however, it's uncomfortable, right? But the good that comes from this, they reprofile to be a healer because they receive profound understanding of the human psyche. Others, their sex life, sensual life, changes forever in the most positive way. They drop labels, they drop judgments, they drop their dark Virgo nature, for example. For natives born under the sign of Libra, well, it is very, very clear. Who is he or she? Is he a Fata Morgana, just a platonic or fantasy relationship? Or is this the love of my life that I've been praying and waiting for forever? The other nuance to this is this relationship any karmic or dharmic? Am I supposed to tolerate and sacrifice? Or am I supposed to be single but then say stay single? Am I supposed to, how should I say, go with my feeling? Or is my feeling 1,000,000% just my Libra nature? Because Neptune is like always a mirror. It will always trigger the shadow side of any sign, in their house context, of course. Scorpio. Well, for Scorpio, it is really redreaming what their daily routines means for them. As in, many Scorpio natives will need to eliminate, for example, toxins from their body. I'm just gonna give example, kidney stones or something that really, really bothers you and it's time for it to be solved, like a medical problem. Why am I feeling like this or that, or why am I off? Well, you go to the hormonal problem and how to solve it. So this can be either a medical energy or an energy where you really need to dream your modus vivendi anew, because the old one is really a static, inert, no longer suitable place for you. For Sagittarius natives, well, this is gonna trigger them on a multi-dimensional level. This is where it's gonna, well, on one hand, drown their normal creative energies. The Sagittarius fire of passion and the spontaneity, the instant, the extremes that they can go through no longer work. So this is where they need a spiritual discipline or a psychological discipline or a creative discipline that with my extravagance, I shouldn't really, I am not even sure how to explain this. As in, a Sagittarius native, through their extravagant way of being passionate, loving, sensuality, creativity, relationship with their children, courage, bravery, how they assume risks. Well, it needs to be a bit more Neptunian. It needs to be a bit more through this. How do I serve my own spirit, not just my being? Because some Sagittarius natives are extremely, let's say, immersed into spirituality. For them, it means get out of the clouds. For others, it means stop traveling because it is a drug, it is escapism. It is just like using substances. For other natives, it means go and be a classic parent for once. Okay, so for Capricorn natives, this is really, well, on one hand, this is quite funny. It can mean a flooding in their house, for real. Pipe leakage, etc., which may either make them consider sell, restructure, or do something innovative with their home or sell it. For other natives, their dream house miraculously just appears on the horizon. But how do I buy it? Because it's outside of my... Of course, this includes family, relation with extended family, their own children, partner, etc. But there's Neptune there, right? So it's complicated. Sometimes to save a marriage, you need an extra marital relationship, and that to be okay. I don't wish to speak any further about this. For Aquarius natives, it's really where my sense of rationale, I can no longer trust the collective. I can no longer trust the internet. This is where their common sense is going to override, it doesn't matter if it's correct or not. Their own common sense is going to override anything. What they think and what conclusions they reached is going to be much more relevant than anyone or anything. And this is ultimately very, very positive. Because creative thinking never was as powerful as this. And you can imagine Aquarius natives have Pluto in their sign, so they need this. They really, really need to break the boundaries of classical thinking, education, and relating intellectually with others. They really need to go hyper and quantum, and this is how it begins. Neptune dissolves the old mental paradigm. And for Pisces natives, well, it's self-worth. It is money. It is money making. It is, what do I have in my life? And Neptune, well, Pisces natives are expert at using Neptune. So let me put it in a nutshell. My delusion is sacred and it's gonna work. It doesn't matter what even Mother Nature says. What I feel, what I dream, what I believe is so valuable that, as I said with the saintly example, it's overriding. So this is what I would like to conclude. Thank you so much for listening. Sorry for this being so long. Of course, you may or may not choose to listen to it. Until next time, bye for now.